So good morning, everybody. How many people think it's really about human dynamics, this whole issue about integration? I'm making an assumption that many of you have a goal of integrating information, being able to see a picture of all the information integrated. And I'm also making an assumption that you might have an issue with data silos. How many people have an issue with data silos? For me, it's like Groundhog Day. I go these companies all over the world, and it's the same issue of these data silos. So the root issue of data silos is what? People silos, right? The data silos come from people silos. Now, that's easy enough to say. What I want to share with you are specific practical techniques that you can use. And what I also want to share with you are 6 what I call inevitable scenarios. So each time I go out on an engagement and I have this Groundhog Day experience, I experience all 6 of these things. You see if they're true for you. So my purpose is to share human dynamics, and if these inevitable scenarios are truly inevitable, doesn't it make sense for us to sharpen our saw and be prepared for it? So that's what I'm really excited about giving you this presentation for an hour to give you a little piece of that, a little taste of that. What we're going to cover is what do we need? In general, what do we need? 6 inevitable scenarios, and more important, principles and techniques to deal with these 6 inevitable scenarios. So, what's needed for successful integration? We need top-level management commitment, right? We need policies in place. We need procedures. We need models, good models. We need technology. We need methodologies. We need expertise. We need processes. We need structure. We need resources. Would you guys all agree that these are the things that we need for data integration? So many of you are shaking your head yes, and for many years I have had this slide and talking to companies and then looking back at successful and unsuccessful organizations with data integration, with data warehousing, with master data management, with any type of enterprise integration effort. And here's the interesting conclusion. There was one company that I dealt with that had all of these things, every single one of these things. And they spent tens of millions of dollars and failed. They had top-level CEO commitment. They had policies and procedures and models in place. They had top expertise from all over the world. They basically had tens of millions of dollars that they spent, and they failed miserably. It was a waste of money. Another organization, a large community college system, had hardly any of these things. They had very little top-level commitment. They had very little in terms of resources, $250,000 budget for hardware, software, consulting, and everything else that they needed to do. And yet they succeeded in building an integrated data warehouse across 13 different community college systems. Very little in terms of methodologies. They used ASP pages on their website, but they got the whole college system integrated. So what was the difference? The difference was the earlier company that I mentioned was a financial company. And they were using these models, procedures, and policies. And basically, they were planting all these seeds, if you will, in rocks. As a matter of fact, they were actually throwing rocks at each other, really. So the vice president in one area was trying to be successful, and his peers would be sabotaging himself, would be sabotaging each other. So what is really needed, now the things that I mentioned on the previous slide are needed. However, a hypothesis for you, what's needed more? If data silos come from people silos, what's needed more is fertile soil. That's what's needed more. What do I mean by fertile soil? Well, fertile soil in the way of how we work together, how we collaborate. And there are specific practical human dynamics. There's a whole field of human dynamics that we could draw upon and apply it to data integration, to business intelligence, to data warehousing. 6 inevitable scenarios. 1, data ownership. We talked about data governance and data ownership. And this very idea of data ownership creates silos. This is mine, and this is mine, and there's data hoarding. You experience that in different groups? Another inevitable scenario is I am right. My approach, my perspective is right. Would anybody care to disagree that this is not an inevitable scenario? That there's a certain, I give a whole course on data righteousness. And it comes up, sometimes in subtle ways. Third, there's an enterprise view, so there's usually enterprise groups doing work, and then a project-oriented group. So the enterprise architect or modeler or data warehouse designer or BI person goes to the project and says, I'm about enterprise integration. And what does the project person usually say? Don't waste my time. I have time, budget, and meeting requirements, and that's what I'm focused on. How do we deal with this? Let's give it a little bit of thought beforehand, because we know it's going to come up. Often, first day on consulting assignments, I'm faced with this situation where this is what executives are dealing with. Fourth, trouble getting buy-in to enterprise-wide integration efforts. How many people are putting forth an enterprise-wide data integration effort of some sort? Okay, how many people are not putting forth an enterprise-wide data integration? How many people do not want to raise their hands? Great, okay. A number of people raise their hands at that, good. What's the value proposition? This is what I get all over the world. What's the value? What's the value? And finally, politics. Often, we've interviewed many companies that have failed in these data integration efforts. And we say, what's the reason that you failed? They say, politics. Okay, we're going to define politics and see what that means. Okay, first of all, data mining. Data mining. In data mining, I'm not talking about data mining like their exploration of data. This whole presentation is based upon one root issue, that data silos come from people silos. And data mining is the biggest issue, not exploration of data, but this data is mine. It's mine. So we say, let's integrate customer information. And the salesperson that's making over $1 million a year, what are they going to say to that when they have their contact information? And they say, sure, I'll just take my contact information and integrate it for the benefit of the whole company. This data is mine. If data is power, if information is power, why should I take my information and integrate it? In the finance area, in the human resources area, we face this over and over again, where, wow, if we could integrate and see how sales relates to finances, and see how HR with people's productivity relates to bottom line sales, what an amazing thing that we could see. Yet HR is protective over the data, and they should be protective over the data. However, whose data is that? Do they really own it, or are they stewarding it? Data mining, if there's nothing else you remember about this presentation, it's about getting from data mining to data housing. So, a quick exercise. Are you open for an exercise? Okay. How many people think it's a good idea to share and integrate information? This time, more hands. Thank you. Okay. Samuel Berger, the senior advisor to President Clinton, senior security advisor to President Clinton, said at an enterprise architecture conference, and this is how he said it. I'll mimic Samuel. He said, databases equals budgets. That's all I want to say. Databases equals budgets. Data is like money. Data is power. Information is power. It's just like money. How many people would agree that information is an extremely valuable resource, just like money? Okay, good. Now, you've all said you want to share data. And you've all said data is like money. So, by transitive logic, let's all take out our wallets. Okay? And here I'll start. And take our wallets out. And can we create a big pile of wallets here? Because you've all said you want to share data, and data's like money, so let's do it. Just as an exercise. I did. I just shared it. It's right out there. Now we're missing an important piece, by the way. Data governance. Right? So you might say, I don't want to put my wallet out there, because who's governing this? Can I get a volunteer for governance? For a data steward? No? Oh, wonderful. Person right up here. What's your name? Sherry. Sherry is going to take care of it. Do you trust Sherry? No. I don't even know Sherry. Okay, so I'm not getting a single wallet out there. What's happening? I thought you said you all wanted to share. Oh, great, Philip. Okay. Fantastic. That's awesome. Yeah, okay. Hey, give him a hand. Great. So, Philip, why did you share?
Knowledge is power, but some people say, I'm going to keep the power to myself, right? If you want to do a real business integration through data integration, people have got to give some of the power and share it.
Exactly, exactly. So people think by hoarding, we're actually creating power. And actually, by sharing, we create power. So thank you. So it's an exercise in power. Why didn't you share? Control, thank you. Thank you. Control. And what do I get out of it? Especially you guys in the back. I have to come all the way up here to do this. And what do I get out of it? Another thing is when I asked Sherry, do you trust Sherry? Immediately people said, I don't even know her. Now, don't take it personally, right? But the point of this exercise, this is what we're asking people to do in different departments. This is what we're asking the salesperson to do, to share like this. Exactly. It's a corporate asset. That's the fact. Do people treat it as a corporate asset? Yes. Okay, so sometimes a consulting company, a third party comes in, and I'm going to talk about that. A third party can be very beneficial because what happens is it breaks this polarity. And I'm going to talk about that in one of the inevitable scenarios. So the first thing is data mining exists. Now, what do we do? What do we do when it exists? What do we do when we go in and we feel this? Well, what's happening is there's a conflict. What's happening is we're doing enterprise-wide stuff, and a project comes along, and there's a conflict. So there's huge amounts of material on conflict management. One of them that I like particular is Bill Urey's work, the Harvard professor who negotiates all over the world, in the Middle East, and every place else. And he wrote a book called Getting to Yes. Do you know that book? And he also wrote a book, Getting Past No. And what he says is there is 5 steps. What's the first step when you have a conflict? The enterprise-wide person is coming and saying, hey, salesperson, give us your information. And there's a conflict. And they say, sure, next week, next month, next year. What's the first thing you do in a conflict? What's that? Agree with them? Okay. See where they're coming from? Okay, good, good. That's one of the steps, not the first step. It's interesting. I do this presentation for hundreds and thousands of people, or thousands of people over time, and basically, most people do not get the first step. What's the first step? That's good. Does it matter? Good ideas. Good ideas. Provide value. Also a good step. These are all steps in the process, not the first step. Acknowledge that there is a conflict. Good. That's also good. Say it's a corporate asset, so it's a good case for it. So here's the interesting thing, that we need to know, and Bill Urey spent his entire lifetime as a Harvard professor and helping in the Middle East all over, and I believe that his philosophy, he's shown his philosophy works. The first step is don't react. The first step, what we're always tempted to do is go outside and say, what's the value? It's a corporate asset. Acknowledge the other person's position. Understand the other person's position. The first step is there's a conflict. Something happens within us. There's a principle that says we must start from us, especially you who are leaders and executives of organizations, especially you. So the first step is, instead of reacting, now this might be an over-exaggeration in most situations, but maybe you felt this way in some situations. Come on, let's just get together. The first step is to just observe. Observe what? The first step, if we start, is actually observe what's happening in us. That's the first step. There's a conflict. There's something happening with us. There's some reaction going on with us, most likely in a conflict. So here's two models. So here's a very practical technique. One model is an event happens. We're doing this enterprise-wide program, and there's a dragon. There's someone preventing us from doing what we want to do, preventing our vision. The next thing that happens is there's thoughts and feelings that we have. Oh, this particular project is building their own data mart. They're building their own data silo. And boy, I have an emotion to that, like, wow, this is going to jeopardize my vision. Maybe there's some fear there. Could it be that there's some fear there of, hey, this is dangerous to my vision? These first two steps, what leading psychologists say is we cannot avoid these first two steps. They will happen. There will be events beyond our control, and there will be thoughts and feelings that we're going to have. And we can't change the initial thought and feeling. We think we can, but we can't change it. The third thing that happens is there's a reaction. The reaction is energy out or energy in. Energy out says, oh, you're a project, you're doing your own thing, you really have to bring it in. Forget about this agile stuff. And just for a minute to integrate. And maybe you're integrating in an agile, but maybe you're doing your own thing. This is a corporate asset. This is a corporate asset. There's energy going out. Maybe a little anger, a little frustration. Or, oh man, wow, what am I going to do here? There's like energy going inwards. Could even be, wow, this could sink me. So the first thing is the only thing that we can control is not have that reaction. Stephen Covey talks about it in his books, where there's a gap, and there's a particular gap that we can use to say, oh, that's the only thing we can control. And once there's a reaction, there's a mess after, leading to another event and another event, escalation, everybody getting involved. So this is a model that doesn't work very well. Here's another model. An event happens, thoughts, feelings happen. We have tapes, we have feelings, we have thoughts, there's physical sensations. And at that moment, the first thing in a conflict is we intervene with awareness. In a fraction of a second, we intervene with awareness. So instead of reacting, we intervene with awareness. And remember that guy looking over the balcony? We actually see what's going on starting where? We have to start with what's going on inside so that when we're addressing the situation, we are like a lake without any ripples. It could involve taking a few breaths. It could involve laughing and looking at it. We've done workshop exercises where we set up these scenarios and we have the enterprise person and the project person, and they get to the serene place of just seeing what's happening, and they both start laughing. So what are you laughing about? Well, the reality is we both work for the same company. That's the reality. And they get it, and they could see it. Then we can move on to other steps and then respond. So, very, very practical technique. I'm just touching on this. And this is based upon decades of leading psychological studies. So that's the first thing. The other thing is when we're observing, there's a difference between the facts that are actually happening and all these filters and judgments and all these stories. So in that first step, if we can separate out the facts, the facts are that you do have a 3-week deadline to do your sprint in the Agile thing. That's a fact. The fact is we don't have time for integration on this. Is that a fact? That's not really a fact. That's a story. So separate the facts from the stories. In Crucial Conversations, another leading book and a number of authorities on handling conflict, because that's what we're dealing with, what they say is, first step, separate the facts from the stories. Same idea. Stories, there's 3 types of stories. What they say. And these are 4 leading psychologists that put together this material. There's the villain. If I'm the enterprise person, the project might be the villain. If I'm the project person, the enterprise person might be the villain. There's the angel. Who do you think that is? Mostly ourselves. And then there's just hopelessness. These are the 3 stories that you could look for. This is from Crucial Conversations. That's the first one, data ownership. Second inevitable scenario, I am right. Darn it, I am right. I am right with my vision. I am right with the enterprise-wide approach versus the project approach. I am right with the modeling. I come from a data modeling background, so we have these old jokes in the data modeling industry because you have modelers that say, hey, this is the right way to model. And then you know the old joke, what's the difference between a data modeler and a terrorist? You can negotiate with a terrorist. You can negotiate. I can make that joke because I've spent most of my career at data modeling. You can negotiate with a terrorist. This is the right model. This is the right model. So I published materials on universal data models, and someone once asked me, oh, these models that you publish, are they the right model? I say, yes. They're not only the right model, but all other models are wrong. They're all wrong. I published this, and I said, I hope you're still reading this, because this is how we lead to data silos. This type of attitude is how we lead to data silos. So what we want to talk about is whose perspective is right, the project view or the enterprise-wide view? Whose perspective is more right? Silly question, isn't it? It's a pretty silly question, except often we get trapped. Whose data is more right? A little bit trickier. Well, this is data. My data is right. So I was involved in a large military operation, and they used this person model, and they had 2 blood types in the person record. And I'm like, how can you have 2 blood types in the person record? Step back from systems. A person only has 1 blood type. How did that happen? Any ideas? And this is used to treat people when they're dying in the military. Used to treat people. So, I said, Len, you said model the truth. Always look to try to model the truth. This is the truth. And I scratched my head, and finally I got it. I started tracing it back with interviews. Ah, there are two blood types for a person. One from system A and one from system B. And they couldn't agree, so they put them both in. And I said, well, why don't you produce a report that shows the different ones and call up the person and find out what their blood type is, so when they need an injection of blood, they can get the right type. They wouldn't do it. It would show that someone's system was wrong. They wouldn't do it. So interesting. Now this pops up. Like I said, this is inevitable. It pops up all over. What can we do? Here's where we do what you guys suggested. Here's where we do of saying, hey, let's acknowledge, I think you said, acknowledge the other side, listen to the other side, appreciate, respect, apologize. These are all different techniques that I've combined together from a whole bunch of leadership materials to say, you know how to do these principles. We all know how to do these. And yet, we don't. We know it intellectually, but this is like an onion that goes an infinite number of layers. To really listen. Here's a exercise for you. On break, when you go out, talk to someone, and when you talk to them, really listen. Listen extremely deeply. Doesn't mean the words. It means their body. It means the emotions that are coming out. It means really listen. Extremely difficult to do because we have 1 billion neurons going on in our brain, 100 trillion cells that we've developed, and all these filters that, oh, you had that? Yeah, I had that too. So again, it gets back to this concept of data mining, where some psychologists say, you know how most conversations go? Yeah. Me, 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 me. Not to be disrespectful, but this is leading psychology theory saying this is how many conversations go. Me, 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 me. Oh, you. No, wait a minute, I meant me. Now, the nature of us is to be of service. The nature of us is to be altruistic. That's our bottom line nature. However, it gets mixed up in all of this filtering and all of this stuff that goes on in all our minds. So it's a real discipline to actually step to the other side. Scenario 3, inevitable scenario. The enterprise versus the project. Data steward, data quality professional, BI professional, BI director, vice president of information management. Whoever's in charge of enterprise would say, we're chartered to work together with projects like yours so that projects define data in a common, consistent way across the enterprise. Or they might say we use it in a common way, or we might say we integrate it. And the common answer, the Groundhog Day answer that I often see is, we completely support enterprise-wide data governance and data quality. However, we're a little different. We have really tight deadlines and budgets. So we'll work together as long as you don't impact our deadlines, dates, tasks, resources, or budgets in any way. So I can see a number of you are smiling out there, and most people do, because this happens all the time. What can we do? We've done the first 2 steps that Bill Airy suggests. Is we've stopped, we've observed what's happening, we see if there's any reactions that we have, and we calm the playing field. Then we go out and really listen. The third step is don't get stuck like the person there. We can still get stuck. We've listened, and then we get into bipolar arguments with our peers, with higher level executives, with anybody. We get stuck. So instead of getting stuck in bipolar, what we do is we reframe versus reject. We're still trying to say, well, wait a minute. Corporate data is an asset. Data is a corporate asset. We're making our argument for it. And there's such a, when we have passion for something, there's such This is how it could be. This is how it could be. And there's something in us. I'm sure many of you have just tremendous passion for this, and we get into bipolar. So what we need to do is reframe. How do we do that? And there's a concept called position versus interest. Are you guys familiar with this concept? Great. Reframing means once we have just observed, seen what happened, separated the facts from the stories, and then stepped to the other side, we open it up. How many possibilities are there in a conflict? Two, 3, 4, 5, 10. How many vote 100? How many vote infinite? There's infinite possibilities. Yet, by our language, we often constrain the possibilities. If we ask questions like why not, what if, what's fair, then we open up the possibilities. So if you can train all the people that work for you to say, hey, the minute you get into a conflict, first of all, don't react. Second of all, really listen, see what's going on to the other side. And third, open up the possibilities by asking what-if questions. Like, what if we could both help the company at the same time? We could actually save time for you. We could save time for me. What if that was a possibility? Which often it is. Hey, what if I help your project first? We had a large enterprise-wide effort. I had one of my guys helping out. And the first thing he did, even though he was in charge of integration, he happened to be a tuning expert, he says, hey, I can tune your database. What if I wash your hand and you wash my hand? What if? And that worked amazingly. What if? Why not work together? Open-ended questions in our language. Second thing is a position. Data is a corporate asset. That's my position. This is my data. This is my budget. These are my clients. They are expecting something from me. In 3 weeks, in Agile, we say you're a chicken or you're a pig. You know that analogy? That there's a chicken is involved, the pig is committed. We're on the Agile effort. This is mine. We have to produce. We'll live or die by that. Bipolar argument. If we can expand the perspectives, saying, what are we trying to do in enterprise-wide data? We're trying to help the company get higher revenues, reduce costs, provide more services, provide more value, and that's the same thing that they're doing, and there's an overlap there. So, third step, expand the conversation. Fourth step, we're not done yet. Deals fall apart here. And by the way, this could be used in data integration. This could be used in any conflict, but we can particularly apply it to data. Make it easy to say yes, build a golden bridge. You said, why do consultants, when they come in? Because it's a third party. If we point to third parties and say, look, these are industry best practices, that's why it happens. It becomes easier. It gets away from the bipolar conflict. We have to be able to save face as we build the bridge to a successful partnership, to a successful collaboration. And fifth, and I talked to a crowd in New York, they didn't like this one, but fifth, bring them to their senses, not to their knees. I come from New York, by the way. But they're like, no, we have to execute authority. We have to say, this is the way it's going to be. Now, there's a time for that. There's a time for that. However, there's a book called Power versus Force, amazing book. And what it talks about is when we exert force, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's Newtonian physics as well. Every time we exert force, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Now, there's a time for force. There's a time for Donald Trump saying, you're fired. There's a time for this, except what Uri says is that use the minimum amount of force needed. There's a time to say, hey, you know what? This is the enterprise-wide direction. So this is the last sense, that this is the last step. The last step is if you need to use force, use minimal amounts. Does this make sense? I'm hoping this framework is useful to you in terms of saying, wow, if I can get my people trained on this type of method, this is really, really useful. Trouble getting buy-in. What do we do with trouble getting buy-in? Well, I went to one data governance conference. This is a sales job. What's the first rule of sales? What's that? Show value? Yeah. Even before that, understand what the motivations are. Understand what the motivations are. So what we can do, anybody familiar with the Zachman framework? He says there's 6 types of questions. Why, what, who, when, where, how. And the last column is the why column. So we model the what, which is all the data. We model the what, which is all the data. And very rarely do we model the why column. Why are people doing what they're doing? When I did this exercise with wallets here, it's really important to understand why Philip did this, why you didn't do this. What we can actually do is model, and we've done this in organizations. At a large financial institution, they actually did this. They actually said, let's be open. Let's see what do they want and how will this project help and how will it hurt. Let's model it. Instead of modeling data, instead of modeling processes, let's follow the Zachman framework and say, hey, let's model the why. Why not? Now, it takes a lot of trust to do that. Now, if you can't do it as an organization, do it for yourself. What does this person want? Who do we start with? The dragon in the room? Where would we start? I gave you a little hint before. We start with ourselves. Psychologists say 95% of the time we don't know what we want. And there's a technique called the 5 whys where you ask yourself why 5 times and you find that the answer is different. So here's another homework for you. Ask what you want, what you really want deeply. And then you can do it for the rest of the organization. Yes, what's the value proposition? Scenario 5. And the IT guy is often saying, that's a good question. What is the value proposition? The next principle is have a clear, compelling, common vision. So it's really important is to state the vision in words at all different levels. This is from our one of our clients, a European client that says, they have this on the site. They said, would you drive like this? Would you drive without having this really clear direction? Not just an elevator speech, but at all levels, the clarity. Second, compelling. There's all different parts of the organization. How do we create a compelling message that gets through? A Darwinian message. A lot of times I go out, do data management for a company, and they hire me. Well, I have one client that hired me 15 years ago. And now they're hiring me again. And they're saying, can you do a model? I said, I did one for you 15 years ago. You did? Could we have it? It's yours. Oh, we don't have it. So I sent them back to them, and they said, wow, a lot of this stuff is really useful because they spent a whole bunch of money, and then they kind of cut funding for it. And then 15 years they came back later, but guess what? Some of the data and processes still apply. And finally, a common mission. So we have to say, what's our team mission and what's the organization mission? Does this slide make sense to you? We have to look at the organization mission. Actually, a lot of people look at it this way. It really should be like this. What's the organization mission and how does the team mission fit in? And finally, 6, we are very supportive of the Enterprise Data Management Program with the, with the fingers behind the back, right? So, trust. Why didn't you put your wallets in? You just met me. You know, it's probably a good thing you didn't put your wallets in. If everybody put your wallets in, it's like, hey, there's no data governance set up here. Now, actually, Philip, you didn't just meet me, so maybe that was a reason. Maybe there's a little bit of trust here. Little bit. A lot. Okay, so if we spent the whole day together, which sometimes I do these all-day workshops, the goal would be get all the wallets in. And actually, you could try this in your company. We do this. We say, hey, why aren't you putting your wallet in? Well, why should I? It's a silly exercise. It simulates what's actually happening. And we actually do this, and it's interesting, and you could see the human dynamics as an analogy. And by the way, you can even give prizes if you want. If somebody says, well, what's in it for me? Okay, we'll give you some chocolate. We'll give you some prizes. So one principle that's really important is, if you want, this is a very kind of a non-technical thing. So if you want an acronym from the conference, IRT. If you really want an acronym, IRT. Integration requires trust. I went into a large government organization, and what I said is, wow, you want to share data, but your actions are not in integrity. You hold people, you make people come late, you're not doing what you say. There's a lot of cordial hypocrisy going on here. A lot of cordial hypocrisy. And later in the conference, someone said to me, do you know who you were talking to? Do you know who those executives were? The Secretary of State? You know all these people you're talking to? I said, yes. But let's not do cordial hypocrisy. Let's do what's actually happening here. I gave specific instances. There's a very successful distributor where we integrated data across the whole organization. Okay? And what they did was amazing in terms of integrating and collaborating and getting to corporate data. And I looked around and I said, oh my gosh, they've set an environment. And I saw specific things that they did. So for instance, one day when I went in, they put me in another room and they said, we got this big corporate issue. All our shipments for this large wheelchair company, all our shipments are all out of New Jersey. And all our other distribution points have nothing to ship. And one of my clients said, oh, I thought I was working on the development database. I was working on the production database. Oh, shoot! That's not what he said. But he took down the whole company. And, okay, so he took down the whole company. So the whole company is inoperational that morning. What did he do? This is a multiple choice question. Blame somebody else. Resign, just say, that's it, I took down this whole company. First, fix the issue, then communicate it. Or communicate it openly, which basically means I'm going to communicate to thousands of people. What did he do? He did D. What did management do? They fired him. No, only kidding. They commended him. They commended him. They encouraged this open, honest communication. They fought through politics. They said, you know what politics means? You know what the definition of politics is? What's the definition? Yes, you could break it down. You have poly, which is many, and then ticks for blood-sucking insects. So many. They said, that's not what politics is. We have to open it up. Core elements, Stephen Covey talks about this in the speed of trust. Look at the character, which basically involves the intent of the person. Am I getting outside of myself? And the integrity. Do I say what I do? Do I do what I say? And the competence, which involves the capabilities as well as the results. So if we want to really integrate data, this is why Agile is actually so strong, because we're showing results in small amounts of time. We're building trust. Another way to build trust is by earning it, by caring about others, and most importantly, Patrick Lencioni has a number of leadership books where he has a triangle, and at the bottom of the triangle, he says the key to trust is vulnerability. The key is openness. You want to build trust, you do what Dan did at this organization, and you create vulnerability, and vulnerability creates strength. Now, it doesn't mean you're always going to be vulnerable and wearing your heart in your sleeve all the time, but we tend to keep things in a bit more. So my observation is companies that share this, for instance, in the motivation exercise, could you actually do that? Could you go to your organization and say, listen, let's be frank, what are our motivations here? and draw a motivational model. What is one of your largest issues that keeps you awake at night? How can you use these 6 different inevitable scenarios and the tools? So you might not remember all the material that I said. Pick one. And I would challenge you to say, write it down on a piece of paper. If there's one area, if there's one thing that I said that makes sense that you are going to do, because often when we leave this conference and we say, what did Len Silverston talk about? I have no idea. Just write down one thing for you that could help you. And you could do it at break, or you could do it sometime, but I would challenge you, just write down one thing. So to summarize, data mining, what's the principle? First, observe. Second, I am right. What's the principle? Really step to the other side. Thirdly, enterprise versus project. Expand. See the whole picture. Fourth, trouble getting involvement and commitment. Understand at a deep level the motivations. What's the value? A clear, compelling, common vision. And lastly, politics, probably the most important in order to get our wallets together, in order to get our data together. Cut through the politics through trust. There are a couple of resources if you like. There are some free articles, and there's links there. There's publications. If you like, and you'd like to talk about this more, we have 10 minutes now, but I'd love it if you emailed me, especially if there's something that you've applied from this that has been useful. So I think it's time for questions.
Where have you applied these techniques and you've seen it work well? You know, just with the
Yes.
trust and getting people to work together and share data.
Great. You know, most of the data integration efforts, honestly, that I've been involved with, I'd say most of them were less successful than what we'd hoped. There's been some successes, but there's a few amazing, amazing successes that I've seen. For instance, I'm working with one large government organization right now. Actually, it's the Department of Education. And at first, when I was bringing out this material, they were saying, yeah, mother pie. And what they started doing is building this into their data governance organization, and we're making great strides in collaborating and in creating common governance and common models across the state of Colorado. And people are starting to use some of these principles and techniques. Because, I asked the question of what's the first thing you do, and people don't know when there's a conflict. And people are starting to get trained. I've done several presentations, because the first time you do a presentation, it usually, yeah, that's a good idea. But to actually apply this, so people are actually starting to apply these principles and techniques, and we're actually making really good progress. Another is a completely different organization, very, very successful. They integrated across 16 different Sybase databases, a large financial firm. Now, in that organization, they actually had a number of these cultural components. This added just some more techniques to already do what they were doing, but doing it better by saying, hey, there's specific techniques. So if, for instance, if you could just take those 5 steps and say, you know what, this is one of the leading experts in conflict management. And then there's a book called Getting Past No that talks about this. And we're going to have some framework, or it could be crucial conversations, or it could be some other framework. But if you could take a framework and put it in, and that's what we did in Colorado. So that's a couple of examples. Thank you. Yes?
Hi. You talked a lot about silos and data. You talked a little bit about data stewardship and data quality. How did you go about getting proper data quality across all those silos so you could get moving on kind of the warehouse piece?
Yeah, thank you. So the way I look at it is that there's the data management aspect of it, and then there's the data governance, or data modeling / architecture and data governance. And I look at it as like two sides of a coin, where that modeling architecture piece is we get the right models, we get the architecture. If we can get the appropriate governance in place, that leads to data quality. We get the right definitions, we get the right rules, we get common methods. For instance, on one client, we're realizing, wow, there's all different rules for the data across the whole organization. Edit rules, rules how we use it, and we're just starting with some of the core elements to say, hey, let's get all this together. If we can get the rules defined, which we're doing, the quality becomes so much better. As a matter of fact, like in master data management, one of the rules is, which is the system of record? And the answer is often, well, I want my system to be the system of record. Then you get into these human dynamics things, but how do we get better data quality? Establish a data governance program which involves get the right organization structure, get the right processes in place. On the second slide, many of those things are about data governance. But one thing I find in data governance organizations, I actually speak at the data governance conference every year for the past number of years, and they don't focus in the data governance program often on this human dynamics piece. Some companies do. They have an organizational effectiveness and organizational competency. And in data governance, many people say data governance is politics. Data governance is human dynamics. Yes, you have the policies, you have the org structures, you have all the technical components in data governance. So to get data quality, one of the biggest issues in data quality is there's redundant data that show different results. So I can't see what my sales is. I can't see how many employees I have. So it's an integration issue. Integration stands for combining into a whole. Disintegration means to separate into parts or to crumble. If I can integrate data and agree and work together, my quality goes up. So yes, it's really about data governance with a human aspect component to it. And what I'd say is few organizations really invest in the type of stuff I'm doing. You know, set up a center of excellence for it. Set up an area where we really need to focus on this. So that's what I would say to get data quality. Yes?
I'm glad to see the presentation's really good. And,
thank you.
And from an agile perspective, of course, I like the references you were making because this is the first few weeks of agile, is going through this kind of communication exercise with your resources to bring them into agreement on the approach and some of the change that's occurring within the organization. But sometimes even doing, your best, you have to revisit, one or two resources that just are not coming along, or just you're not communicating well with them,
right.
For whatever reason, because it is a lot of change and there is some fear.
Yes.
What part of this would you emphasize, given that kind of scenario?
Did you say there's a lot of shame loops and fear?
Yes.
What I would emphasize on the shame loops and fear is on that part that I talked about reacting, that's probably the most powerful tool and technique. So when we look at the reaction, the two greatest reactions are shame and actually anger. The fear is okay. We can reframe fear to mean excitement and opportunity. Oh, there's fear. Wow, there's something happened. It's exciting, it's opportunity. When it turns into anger or shame, people think anger and shame, by the way, are emotions. The leading psychologists say, no, they're not emotions. Anger is a reaction. It's, Urgh! And shame is a reaction going in. Crucial Conversations talks about silence versus violence. Silence is like going in, and violence is going out. So the shame and anger loops, the greatest thing is when you see it, one thing, stop, take a breath, look at it. That's the greatest thing to do. It sounds so simple, and yet financially we could save billions of dollars if we did that and just looked instead of creating messes. That's the biggest thing I would focus on. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Len.